And then when they call Rose and say, hey, this isn't working out, Rosemary's very upset. Camp's probably not the best place for her. For Rose to be like, but I'm at the spa. What do you want me to do about it? So that's not really my thing. I paid for you guys to keep her, so you kind of need to finish that. Summer's not over. Summer's not over yet, so. And then when they're like, no, we insist that you pick her up, she calls the family secretary and is like, yeah, Rosemary's having a hard time. They kind of want her to go. So if you can just, figure out something else to do with her. I don't have any second options. I can't really help you out with that. But you're so smart. You're so good at your job. I know you can do it. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Dear Denise. Today we're going to keep going in Ask Not by Maureen Callahan, and we're talking about Rosemary Kennedy today. So I don't have a big intro or anything like that, except to say that all of the women that we're going to hear about from here on out, there's 6 women left. Most likely each of those women will just be one singular episode rather than parts to a whole, because these are all shorter stories. So if you will recall, Rosemary Kennedy was sister to Ted Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy. This is their sister. And there's always been a lot of shadow when it comes to Rosemary Kennedy, because she was the sister who was a little bit mentally slower, and in a family that hailed and lauded only those who were the best, brightest, and most competitive. Rosemary didn't fit into the family culture. So what were they going to do about Rosemary? And it's a really tragic story about parents, and particularly a father, who just really wanted to get this liability off his hands and did all he could to make her somebody else's problem, and then just kind of try to smudge out the problem altogether. So it's a disturbing story, but it is one of our shorter stories in the book, because unfortunately Rosemary had a much shorter life and existence than the others, because she wasn't allowed to live her full life. All right, the book begins by saying that she no longer had the word for it, but she knew the feeling, lonely. She had her nuns and her nurses, and they were lovely, but this wasn't her real home, and they weren't her siblings. She only ever saw her brothers on TV. She saw the news footage of Jack that terrible day, and she knew something bad had happened to him, but she couldn't understand what. Sometimes she got a glimpse of her sisters, or her mother and daddy, but none of them ever came to visit. What had Rosemary done? She had been such a good girl. They all called her Rosie, which had been her mother's nickname too, and it suited her. She was a beauty, prettiest of all the Kennedy girls, always happy, and most of all pleasing to her father. She adored him. She wanted to be his favorite, and had reasons to think she was. After all, it wasn't Kik or Eunice or Pat or Jean whom Joan had chosen to stay with him in London. It wasn't one of her brothers, even though it was no secret that the boys were treated far better than the girls, as if they were better. No. Joe had chosen her. It was September 1939. England had declared war on Germany. Joe had sent all the other Kennedy sons and daughters back to the States with Rose. Only Rosie had been allowed to remain with Joe, who was still serving as a U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom despite his well-known affinity for Hitler. It was a strategic ploy by Roosevelt, who loathed Kennedy's anti-Semitism, but worried that cutting him loose too fast would spur Kennedy to start a rival isolationist movement. As it was, Kennedy had given an interview in which he blamed Eleanor Roosevelt for, quote, always sending me a note to have some little Susie Glitz for tea at the embassy. It was yet another example of Joe's hypocrisy. The man whose vaulting ambition was fueled by prejudice against Irish Catholics was every bit as hateful of another persecuted group facing eradication. Of that, he cared nothing. The war would drain us, he said. It would turn our government into National Socialism. And what would we be fighting for? Democracy is finished in England. But he was happy to leave Rosemary there. Rosemary, who, with her limitations, would never have survived the horrors of Hitler's eugenics. Was he aware of having a death wish for his daughter? Joe was on record as supporting Hitler's forced sterilization plan. Its number one targets those with congenital mental deficiency. Joe called it a great thing. I don't know how the church feels about it, but it'll do away with many of the disgusting specimens which inhabit this earth. Joe, I don't think you want to be talking about disgusting specimens. And see, this is exactly what I'm saying about these Kennedys. They just use the church as yet one more tool in their arsenal of manipulation. They don't, exactly. I don't know how the church feels about it, but I support it. I'm sickened by Joe Kennedy. If there was a book I wanted to read, it would be about who is this person who slipped out of the cracks of hell and came up to raise a family. The power that he wielded over this family and then over the nation is frightening. And with statements like this, just I love and I support the idea of just killing people with mental deficiencies, his daughter being one of them. And it really makes clear later on what happens in this chapter to Rosemary. If he thought that killing people with congenital deficiencies was, a great plan for society, then what he did probably seems extremely tame, nay, kind, He let her live. Okay, well, the book says that Rosie didn't feel left behind or less cared for. In fact, Joe had told her the opposite. He had chosen her to stay in England because she was special. "You're going to be the one to keep me company," he told Rosie. She was 20 then, fresh off of her triumphant debut at Buckingham Palace.
It's the moment when, as a debutante, she is presented at court. And this year, that thrill was experienced by Miss Rosemary and Miss Kathleen Kennedy, daughters of the American ambassador. With their mother, these representatives of our friends the United States make a graceful group.
Everyone had been so worried about how she would do. Would Rosie embarrass the Kennedys? Well, yes, a little. It was the smallest, most frustrating thing, Rosie tripping in front of the king and queen. Everyone else shook it off, including Rosemary, but not her mother. This was a test, and Rosemary had failed it, even after her mother had arranged those weeks-long etiquette lessons. How to curtsy, how to dance, how to behave with men. The men. They liked Rosemary a lot, and she liked them. Her brother Jack was the kindest of all her siblings in helping Rosie to socialize. He would bring her with him to nightclubs and parties, and their sister Eunice took note. He would dance with her and kid with her and make sure a few of his close pals cut in so she felt popular, Eunice said. He'd bring her home at midnight and then he'd go back out. There were whispers at the palace party that Rosie had propositioned not one but 2 waiters. A family scandal. A Kennedy girl being so forward? Didn't matter that old Joe snuck into guest rooms whenever Kik or her sisters had teenage friends to sleep over. This Joe guy, I'm not even kidding with you, crawled up out of the cracks of hell, this one. You can't even have a friend over without your dad slipping into your room? That's so gross. I cannot even take it. And it didn't matter that sometimes he had his way with them, whether they wanted to or not. The teenage friends? No one talked about it. Joe took whom he wanted when he wanted, and Rose Kennedy couldn't do a thing about it. That her boys were turning out the same way didn't seem to be a problem. I would die 1,000 deaths. Oh my goodness. See, that would be my greatest fear, of having a husband who was just completely out of control. That my boys would look to him and be like, oh, that's masculinity. Oh, that's how you do this thing called being a man. Because what alternative is there? The man, the biggest man in their lives is acting like a complete fool. You would think that's how you do it. And his dad had power and position. So again, you would think, oh, whatever dad's doing, that must be, the ticket to success. That must be the train you ride. Because looks like it's working for him. And you would never know all of the emotional and mental turmoil that's going on inside your dad, because none of that ever seems to come to the surface. All you see is that your dad's getting what he wants, when he wants it, and how he wants it. Well, who doesn't want that? But Rosie, propositioning a waiter, no, not that, Rosie. You can't act like that. The boys can do whatever they want, but you can't be going up to any waiters making any kind of comments. And also a waiter. What, Rosie? No, gross. Rosie, she was a problem. Rose had so little tolerance for Rosie as it was. How slow she was at school. How earnest and childlike. How needy. Rose hated neediness. Even Jack, with all his serious illnesses, had learned to suffer silently. But Rosie wasn't quiet about it. Besides, Jack was smart. He kept his nose at a book, was quick with a quip, a sharp rebuke that could set even his mother aback. He was reading Winston Churchill's The World Crisis at age 13. He mocked his ever-growing family, once telling 2 friends who had picked him up from boarding school, I want to stop by the house for a minute and check the nursery and see if there's anybody new in the family. Gallows humor was his preferred coping mechanism during his multiple hospital stays. Take a peek at my chart yesterday, he wrote a college friend in 1935, and I could see that they were mentally measuring me for a coffin. Eat, drink, and make love as tomorrow or next week we attend my funeral. Rosie wasn't glib like that, not remotely. Things came much harder for her, reading and writing especially. She was the only Kennedy sibling who wasn't athletic. She struggled with her weight, always up or down 5 or 10 pounds. All the others knew to stay slim and tanned. Even disheveled, they all looked so athletic and stylish. Not Rosie. She'd never be that carefree girl on a Kennedy sail, windswept hair and white sweaters, weightlessly bobbing on ocean swells while the men sipped bourbon and smoked cigars. She couldn't even row a dinghy. A basic expectation for a Kennedy. Rosie's beauty, even to her vain parents, didn't compensate for any of that. Nor did her essential sweetness. Theirs was a family of winners. And Rosie, well, she was beginning to look like a loser. She was self-aware enough to know something was wrong with her. She just still didn't know what. To a family that is hard-nosed and hard-bitten, as these people seem to be, the sweetness would grate on them, because they would translate that sweetness as extreme weakness. Her inability to create a hard shell, her vulnerability, would sicken people like this, because they would look at her and just be like, oh, pull it together. We don't want to know about all the feelings that you have. It burdens us to know. Okay, and how can we continue to be winners when we're being dragged down by your emotions? Okay, so pull it together. Stop your crying. It's gross. It's ugly. You look ugly when you're crying. And you're so fat as it is that the crying isn't helping. So stop all that. But Rosemary could not stop all that, because it's how she felt. And she had not developed this ability to suck it up, and to just pretend like it wasn't happening, because it was happening for her. And the hard thing is that she didn't have the ability to vocalize and to articulate what was happening and why she was being left behind. But of course she knew she was. It would have made her sort of thrashing around looking for somebody to explain to her why they didn't love her as much. And of course she was going to continue to vocalize in whatever way she was able to, that she felt left behind. Her very personality didn't fit in with who these people were. Rosemary didn't know what to do, neither did her parents. Joe had enrolled Rosie at a special school called Assumption at the Belmont House in Kent, 30 miles outside London. Here she was placed under the tutelage of a Mother Isabel who favored the Montessori method. It was a revelation. Rosemary was as much a teacher as a student, working with the younger students as an aide. Her self-esteem rose, and Assumption's bucolic setting settled Rosemary. Everything was calmer and slower and cleaner. There was no high stakes. All Rosie had to do was concentrate on reading and writing, which remained big challenges, as well as smaller tasks. Joe Kennedy was relieved. As he wrote to Rose in October 1939, Rosemary, quote, is contented completely to be teaching with Mother Isabel. She's happy, looks better than she ever did in her life, is not the slightest bit lonesome, and loves to get letters from her siblings, telling her how lucky she is to be over here. Tell them to keep writing that way. She loves being the boss here and is no bother or a strain at all. Her progress pleased Joe to a point. He still considered Rosemary a liability to Brand Kennedy and had no intention of welcoming her back into the fold. She must never be at home, he wrote Rose, for her sake, as well as for everybody else's. She must never be at home. What a cutting statement from a father. Let's not let that one back in. No. Not Rosemary. For her sake and for everybody else's. We need to find another place to stow that one. Let's not let her back home. Let that sit on you. That the doors to your home have been closed to you. And that your mother and your father have conspired to keep you somewhere else. Because you embarrassed them. What a cutting blow. Joe was raising you as future presidents. As the war raged and America's involvement became more likely, Joe Kennedy, with his anti-Semitism and isolationism, was political poison. His long-harbored dream to become the first Irish Catholic president of the United States was dead. If it couldn't be him, it would be Joe Jr., whether he wanted it or not. So better, too, he wrote to Rose, that Rosemary stay in England that Christmas, even though Joe wouldn't be back there until the following March or April. Mother Isabel concurred, writing to Rose that December of Rosemary's personal growth. All who are working with Rosemary, Mother Isabel wrote, quote, are very satisfied with the result of this term. Rosemary is very well, obviously happy, and she's made much progress in many ways. She has some supervision of the children in the garden, and she also has a stated time for reading to them. She prepares and gives them their lunch in the middle of the morning, and has many other occupations of a domestic kind, which she can do alone, not the least of which is putting away the dining room things, china and silver, in the cupboard. Rosie was also quite self-aware, Mother Isabel wrote, and was working hard on managing her emotions. She wasn't proud of the fits she threw. Quote, she asked me one day to tell her what faults she had, as faults spoil people, And this struck me, showing me how much she thinks things out. We've had more talks, and she's been trying hard to think of what pleases others before what pleases herself, and to be nice to people even when she thinks they're not nice to her. She comes to me whenever something upsets her, and we have it out along those lines. Rosie was working hard to impress her father. With the new decade approaching, her father, still Roosevelt's ambassador in the United Kingdom, would visit her from time to time. Sometimes he would even take her out of school and bring her to London for special weekends together. She never felt so capable. Her father, the very important ambassador preparing for war, chose to rely upon Rosie more than anyone. Not Joe Jr., who was going to be president, not the brilliant Jack, not even his own wife. Rosie took such pride in pleasing him, and they would often socialize with Joe's great friends, Eddie and Mary Moore. Rosie had become the ambassador's companion in England, something of a surrogate wife. The combination of her father's intense attention, his longed-for approval, and a new realization that what made Rosie different also made her special was gratifying. When Joe left, whether for the city or America, he was never far from her mind, as she expressed so poignantly in a March 1940 letter to him. Darling Daddy, Mother Isabel says I am such a comfort to you, never to leave you. Daddy, I feel honored because you chose me to stay. And the others, I suppose, are wild. P.S. I'm so fond of you, and I love you very much. That kind of profuse writing of emotional sentiment, even, it's not like she's having a fit or anything. Just her pouring out her very tender and vulnerable heart on the paper. I can guarantee you that a Kennedy would have read that and just, it would have felt like ick to them. Like, oh, I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I know. Stop being a burden with your emotions. I get it. Okay? Stop. And can you imagine being Rosemary, and the only way that you can figure to kind of get in is to try to let these people know, like, you mean a lot to me. I love you a lot. You know, I know I'm not everything everybody else is, but I love you a lot. And even that would have triggered them to disdain. In the countryside alone, with the children and the nuns, Rosie thought only of Joe, and she took every criticism to heart. You're getting altogether too fat, old Joe had told her. Her other progress paled. He said the same thing to Rosie's teachers after an in-person visit. She's getting altogether too fat, and I told her in no uncertain words, so I wish, if you could, that you could try to build up the idea that she should lose some weight. I told her that her mother would be very disappointed, and also that I could not have her picture taken for America if she remains as stout as she is. I do not have words for that. I am... What the hell does it matter about the size of your child? I mean, unless she's just so morbidly obese that her health is being completely plowed under because she's so heavy. But I'm not, but she was 5 or 10 pounds overweight from time to time. She's learning how to be self-sufficient. Her reading and her writing are progressing. She's proud of herself because she can help out, and having things that you can do to contribute to the household that you're in gives such a sense of worth. But none of that mattered to him because, ew, yuck. That dress seems a little tighter than the last time I saw you, and I can't have your picture taken for America if you're going to look like such a fat pig. I'm mortified for her, and Rosie was mortified too. I would do anything to make you happy, Rosie would say, and she told her father this over and over. She went on a strict diet. She took the red pills her father gave her, and the 3 times per week injections that Joe said was their secret. Rosie didn't know what was in any of these medications or why she needed them. The same doctor had given Rosie her physical and declared her to be, quote, in perfect condition. It seemed like they were really for her father, who was ecstatic that she was taking this stuff. Can you imagine having your child injected 3 times a week and giving her these red pills to take, which probably amounted to speed, because you needed her to be a certain weight? Meanwhile, she's got way bigger fish to fry, just learning how to be a self-sufficient adult. And you can't give any praise for that. You can't recognize any of that because visually it's not all that you want. In May 1940, Rosie was awarded her diploma. Germany was advancing through Europe, and Joe felt that there was no other option but to get her out, if only briefly. As he wrote to Rose, when things settle down here under any regime, meaning the Nazis, because he fully expected the Nazis to take over and was completely fine with that, he said, they'll be delighted to have her back, and I'm sure she'll come back hopping. In the meantime, Rosemary would return to the Kennedy home in Bronxville, flown from London to Lisbon to New York by family friends and private Kennedy secretaries Eddie and Mary Moore. No one was prepared for Rosie's re-entry into Kennedy family life, nor for what she needed. She'd spent a year at the Belmont House, and now she was without everything that had helped her to flourish there. Mother Isabel, the children, the one-on-one talks and lessons, the structure and the quiet. The Kennedy house was a cauldron of competition, of strictly enforced exercise and feeding, a chaotic environment that all too often lacked the presence of either parent. Rosemary may have been home, but she was also at the same time completely lost. Unable to keep up with her siblings, to participate in the dinner table discussions of foreign policy or their athletic excursions, Rosemary was the odd girl out. Rose herself conceded as much. In our family, if you're not doing anything, you're left in the corner. But Rose, you're the one that creates the structure and culture within your home as the matriarch of it. What are you talking about? Somebody's going to get left in the corner if they can't keep up. No, then that's your job to pull them back in, right? You don't just be like, well, sorry, hope that corner's not too cold over there. Anyway, Rose was the worst. We do get a chapter on Rose, but I found it wholly dissatisfying. Rosie was excluded from parties and family vacations. Family vacations? What did they do with her? Did she just have to stay at the house by herself? They find some friends to throw her, into the arms of and be like, can you take care of Rosie? The rest of us have something to do. Her mother had tried putting Rosemary in a sleepaway camp in western Massachusetts that summer, but the staff, uninformed by Rose of her daughter's special needs, was horrified by Rosemary's condition. Her shoes were so small that her feet were bleeding. She tended to wander out late at night and wound up sleeping in the same room as the camp director. Rosemary began acting out, missing her father especially, but was heartbroken when she was asked to leave the camp after only 3 weeks. I was going to work so hard for my daddy, she said before leaving, and he deserves it. Pray for me. God bless you. Rose refused to get her daughter. Instead, she remained ensconced at a luxury spa and retreat in Maine. Joe was traveling. Once again, Eddie Moore was called up again to fetch Rosemary and find some other place to put her. That's the person whose story we really need. Eddie Moore must have had an inside look at all of the chaos of this family. And how could Rose put Rosemary in a sleepaway camp for all summer and never mention to the staff? Rosemary has some limitations, and so these are some of the things that we do to help Rosemary feel comfortable. Well, probably because Rose didn't know what to do to make Rosemary feel comfortable because she'd never tried. And it doesn't seem like she was at all involved in the education that Rosemary was receiving in England, so that she could have mimicked to some extent what Rosemary was accustomed to in order to find success. But let's just throw away this week's sleepaway camp, and they can kind of just figure out, they'll get to know that Rosemary's a little bit different than some of the other children at the camp. And then when they call Rose and say, hey, this isn't working out, Rosemary's very upset. I think it's time for her to leave. This camp's probably not the best place for her. For Rose to be like, but I'm at the spa. What do you want me to do about it? So that's not really my thing. I paid for you guys to keep her, so you kind of need to finish that. Summer's not over. Summer's not over yet. So, and then when they're like, no, and we insist that you pick her up, she calls the family secretary and is like, yeah, Rosemary's having a hard time. They kind of want her to go. So if you can just, figure out something else to do with her. I don't have any second options. I can't really help you out with that, but you're so smart. You're so good at your job. I know you can do it. St. Gertrude's, a private boarding school in Washington, D.C. for the low IQ middle school girls, was next. Rosemary was 22 years old. 22 years old, and she's at a school for middle schoolers. Okay, so imagine the indignation of that. Rosemary has the wherewithal to know that she is like 12 years older than some of these girls. Rosemary was 22 years old, and whatever happened during her brief time here was enough to escalate her tantrums. She snuck out most every night, whether she was looking for someone or trying to find her way home or trying to escape abuse, sexual or otherwise, is unknown. But Rosemary, serially abandoned by her father and mother, made to feel that she was defective in the product line that otherwise produced outstanding Kennedy offspring, had understandably become a tearful young woman with lots of rage. Or, as Rose Kennedy put it, disquieting symptoms began to develop. Oh, disquieting symptoms, huh? Your child is sneaking out of the school that you put her in at night. She is raging and having tantrums. But could it be because she's 22 years old in a school for middle school girls? I mean, any one of us would be outraged at finding ourselves trapped with what essentially are children when you're an adult. And nobody will listen to you and nobody cares. And everybody just keeps trying to push you away. Like, Rosemary, get on, okay? Just like either figure out how to be one of us or don't, but like just stop wrecking everything. And that's the way you're made to feel your whole life, and you don't know how to be what it is that they need you to be in order to be accepted. Rosemary would remain at St. Gertrude's for the next 13 months until November 1941. And that's when Joe came up with his own final solution to the Rosemary problem. And what an interesting use of words there, Maureen Callahan, I see you. A final solution to the Rosemary problem. Let's take a page out of the Nazis' book and just figure out what to do with this person who is inconvenient to our lifestyle. And the thing is that, of course, Joe's not going to go kill his daughter. But he did the next closest thing. Joe Kennedy had heard of an experimental new procedure for the hardest cases, women mostly, who were moody or sad or sexually promiscuous, and he asked Kik to look into it. Kik is the other sister, if you'll recall. Kik was now working as a reporter at the Times-Herald in D.C. She confided in her quasi-romantic interest, her colleague John White, about her older sister. It took a while for Kik to work up the courage to tell White just what was wrong with Rosemary. White felt Kik's hesitation. It was as though she was confessing something quite embarrassing, almost shameful, he said. I got the feeling that her family viewed Rosemary as a beloved failure, perhaps a disgrace. But Kik got the information she had been tasked with finding, and she came back to her mother with an informed opinion. Oh, Mother, no, she said. It's nothing we want done for Rosie. Rose was relieved. The idea hadn't sat well with her from the beginning. Well, I'm glad to hear that, she said. But Rosie couldn't live with the family. That was for sure. We don't tolerate losers. One day, in November 1941, Joe told Rosie he wanted her to meet someone new, a Dr. Freeman, over at George Washington Hospital. It would be their secret. Not even Rose would know about it. Kind of like those injections. Remember those? Remember, we'd have you get them 3 times a week, but it was just our secret, Just you and Daddy. Remember that? It's kind of like that. Don't tell anyone. Oh, I hate the manipulation of that. Freeman was famous and brilliant, and he was working on revolutionary treatment for people like Rosie. Joe didn't tell her what he had discussed with the great doctor. That would be a surprise. Rosie complied. I would do anything to make you so happy. Everyone in and around the Kennedy family knew that Rosemary would never say no to her father no matter what. Oh, the power of that man reigned in Rosemary's life. One of Jack's friends found something sinister in Joe's dynamic with Rosemary. She wondered, and she wasn't alone in wondering this, if Joe had been sexually abusing his daughter. Leaving her alone in England, using her as his companion, shuffling her among all these institutions and keeping her away and quiet and apart from her siblings, it made sense, she thought. And it kind of does when you consider that this sicko was breaking into his daughter's rooms when they had sleepovers with their teenage friends and just picking which friend he liked the best and, hauling her out whether she wanted to be hauled out or not. A sick man like that very well could have used his daughter, his mentally disabled daughter, for his own ends, for his own pleasure. The day after Thanksgiving, November 28th, 1941, Rosie walked into the appointment Joe had set for her. The doctors had strange questions, and they wanted to shave her head. Would that be all right? If Rosie wanted to be like her siblings, brilliant and athletic and always doing and saying the right things if she wanted to be a real Kennedy, well, this was the first step to fixing her. So you can say no to having us shave your head, but we can't make you like your brothers and sisters if you say no. Do you want to be like them? Do you want it to be easy to talk at the dinner table? You want to be good at athletics? Well, there's some sacrifices you have to make. Are you willing to do that? I mean, the wheedling and the manipulation and the coercion of somebody who could not fight for herself on the same mental stage here. It's like, how is Rosemary supposed to stand up to a multitude of professionals, of doctors, of nurses, of all these people being like, this is what you need to do, okay? Is she really going to say no to that? Hey, I couldn't say no to that. I can never say anything to the doctor. I go to the doctor, I'm like, whatever you guys think, okay? It's like, I never advocate for myself. I don't know how to do it. And Rosemary, who is just trying to make her dad happy, was there ever a time at all when it's even conceivable that she could have said, I don't want that done? No! Rosie's hair, her beautiful, thick, dark, wavy hair, the perfect contrast to her blue eyes and ivory skin. Why would they take that from her? Her beauty. Oh, this was only temporary, she was told. Hair grows back. The nurses wouldn't need even to shave all of it, just half from, say, her forehead to the crown. Oh, that makes it better. So now I can walk around with half a wig hanging off my head? That's not a concession. Rosie was given a hospital gown. Her hair fell to the floor in soft clumps. A sedative, a stretcher, an operating room, a stainless steel table, restraints. Her head strapped down. White towels and sheets swathed round her, bright white lights. She couldn't see what was happening. There was a whir, powerful and loud, followed by the scent of metal upon bone, sharp and smoky. The doctors told Rosie not to worry. She didn't even need anesthesia. That's how simple and painless this was. Everything that was happening to her, she'd be awake and aware. Not many operations you could say that about. I don't know a lot about a lot of things, as I've said many a time. How can you cut into somebody's head and they don't feel that? I mean, I understand, like, once you get to the brain, maybe, like, things are desensitized, but the cutting into the head, you haven't reached my brain yet. You haven't hit the part of my brain that's going to stop me from feeling this. Am I not going to feel a saw cutting into my forehead? Pressure above her eye now. Rosie's head was vibrating, the side of her head pulsating. The doctor talking to her seemed pleased. The way they once did this was so much less pleasant. Those other patients he'd had to knock out, not with anesthesia, but with electroshock, through the brain, even though it would take 5 or 6 times, and the patients convulsed and howled and cried. Sometimes they'd beg to die. But not Rosie, because she's getting the better end of the deal. You know, we know how to do this now. We didn't used to. We used to really torture people. But lucky you, you get to lay here and we'll saw into your head. And, you know, we're so good at this. We've done it so many times that we now know how to do it. And we don't even have to electrocute your brain. Isn't that great? We have made so many strides. But Rosie, lucky her, she didn't have to suffer that. Nor did she have to endure Dr. Freeman's earlier method. Ice picks from his kitchen drawer positioned right above his patient's eye. A white cloth draped diagonally over the face as he hammered through the eye socket straight to the brain, moving the pick back and forth like a metronome till he heard a pop, pop, pop of nerves being sliced apart, like the sound of a soda can opening and decompressing. And then he knew his work was done. Side note, how would a person even come up with this? Unless you're just a crazy, deranged psycho. What kind of a doctor goes, you know what would be a great idea? If you lay down and I grab an ice pick from the drawer. I've got it right here. I'm not going to sterilize it. It's not a big thing. I'm just going to take it, jab it in your eye, jerk it back and forth. Done. You're a new person now. Like, how would one come to that conclusion? How would one even conceive of that? All right, well, all those patients would emerge with 2 black eyes, bruised up and having to wear dark glasses for weeks, but Rosie wouldn't have to worry about that. Her looks would be untouched. I mean, except for the bald head and the, hole in it. Other than that, you're untouched. The doctor moved to her other side now. What was he doing? Was he doing it again? Why did one of the nurses look terrified? The drill against Rosie's other temple was grinding against bone. Granules as smooth and sharp as a shark's tooth were splattered against Rosie's head and onto the table. Why was she awake? What was this torture? Where was her daddy? The drill went quiet. The heavy tool went down, clattering on a tray like silverware. Something slim slid into one of the holes in her skull. Dr. Freeman stood above her. He was still talking to her, asking her questions. What was her name? Who was the president? Could she sing a song? Could she count backwards from number 10? Rosie could do all those things with holes in her head and a man using what felt like a dull butter knife to root around her brain. But the deeper the tool went, the harder it was to understand the doctor, to understand what was happening to her. And when it was finally over, Rosie wasn't Rosie anymore. She would never be able to do anything again. Talk, walk, swim, dance, flirt with boys, smoke cigarettes, meet future queens, accompany her father to dinner, go to the movies, take a shower, comb her hair, feed herself, use the toilet. She would never again go home to be one of the Kennedys. Her brain's circuitry, like a string of Christmas lights, crushed, one by one, had gone dark. Rosie was left functionally as a 2-year-old. Whenever reporters asked what happened to Rosemary, Jo had a ready explanation. She was following her life's calling in another state, teaching children who were, as they were called back then, mentally retarded. Rosie's own siblings would never even know exactly where she was. Her mother's round-robin letters to the children would forever include each of them by name except Rosemary. She'd been stashed away in another state, left without any contact from her siblings or her parents, and she was erased. It's so hateful what they did to her. And she didn't do anything to deserve that. She just was unpleasant to them. Because she wasn't as fast as them. And I wonder if Joe knew that they were going to fail at that procedure. You know, I mean, is there any successful lobotomy? I don't know. But it makes me wonder if he told them, like, it's okay if you're kind of careless about it. Because it would be easier for us to just stash her away and, you know, she doesn't know us, and so we don't have to feel burdened by it anymore. Because she won't know where we are, and she won't ask about us, and she won't expect us to come around. So you don't have to be too careful about it, because he was so uncareful with her in her life. Why would he care about her on that operating table? Anyway, sorry, I didn't expect to get so upset about that. It just made me feel really bad for her. But anyway, thank you for watching, and we will cover, let's see, who are we going to talk about next? Oh, you know what, let's talk about next? Let's talk about Kik Kennedy, because she was mentioned in this story, so we need to get ourselves, let's remind ourselves who Kik was. Her story is really, really interesting. I really enjoyed the story of Kik, because honestly, I didn't really know anything about her. Kik was one of those siblings who fell under the Kennedy curse, and it's really an interesting story. Her life was quite interesting. That'd be an interesting book to read as well. What about Kik Kennedy? Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you in the comments. Bye.